My 7-year-old sister whispered to her teddy bear, "Daddy's gonna regret hurting us." My dad stumbled in drunk again, and I knew we were all in trouble. He stopped in front of his favorite spot on the couch and picked up my little sister's teddy bear with an angry expression. "Kids, come here now!" he shouted. We immediately rushed over and lined up in front of him like little soldiers, just as he'd trained us to do. He slammed the bear down onto the floor. "What did I say about leaving a mess in my spot? Bend over, all of you," he demanded, unbuckling his leather belt. Mom rushed over from the kitchen and stood between us, glaring back at him. "You swore you would stop. You promised you'd quit drinking." He immediately got defensive, slurring about how she didn't control him and how dare she embarrass him in front of us. But when she still stood her ground, he held up his arm and landed a hard slap to her face. That was the last time he ever touched our mom. My siblings and I crowded around the living room, watching our mom fight back tears in the kitchen. We heard her sniffling while she pressed a cold pack to her face. "I hate when Dad does things like this," my brother Sean said, explaining how he'd seen our dad shove Mom into the hallway wall just 2 weeks earlier. My older sister Ivy said she'd heard him threaten to take us away from Mom forever. Then little Letty started crying, pulling the teddy close to her chest, whispering something we couldn't hear. "We can't just keep letting him get away with this," I said. "But what can we do? We're just kids," Sean said, frowning. "But that's exactly it. It's like Home Alone. The adults will never expect it if we do something," Ivy agreed. We spent the next hour setting everything up for Plan Home Alone while our parents slept in the bedroom. Sean loosened the kitchen faucet and taped a note to it that said LEAVE in big letters. Ivy superglued the refrigerator door shut and stuck a sign on it that read, "We don't want you here anymore." I scattered hundreds of Lego pieces across the hallway leading to the kitchen and left a note on the wall that said, "You're done hurting us." Letty helped us set up one final surprise in her bedroom. Around 4 a.m, we heard his bedroom door open as he woke to get water from the kitchen. We heard him walk into the kitchen and yell out curse words as the faucet sprayed him right in the face. He found the first note and heard him rip it up. He went straight to the refrigerator to get water but couldn't pull the door open no matter how hard he yanked. He found the second note stuck to the handle. Now he was getting really angry. He stormed out of the kitchen and fell right into the third trap, stepping on the Lego pieces before falling onto his hands and knees in it. When his eyes landed on the third note, he started yelling for us. "Kids, come here now!" But this time we didn't show up, so he shouted again. We stayed still. That's when he spotted Letty peeking out from behind the hallway door holding her teddy bear. "You little brats did this," he said. His voice was scary calm. He got up and gently picked off the Lego pieces that had gotten stuck to him. He started walking toward her and all of us scattered, running toward Letty's room for the final trap. Dad stepped in front of the door and knocked quietly. "Kids? Come out now. Daddy won't hurt you." "Well, maybe just a little." He laughed and twisted the knob. We huddled in the far corner of the room, holding each other. "Get out of the house," I managed to yell out. He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So you're making demands now like your mother? If only you were all as smart as her." He grinned and stepped over the last bit of fishing line we'd strung at ankle height. We gasped and cowered together, thinking this was it. He'd won. We were goners. He walked toward us slowly with this sick grin on his face like he was enjoying our fear. "You kids really thought you could mess with me?" he said, getting closer. "Mom, help!" Sean and Ivy screamed out. That only made Dad happier. "She can't help you. She's been trapped in the bathroom all night. Now who should I hurt first? Let's start with the youngest." He grabbed Letty by her pigtails. She held out the teddy bear in front of her and looked Dad straight in the face. "Game over." She pulled out the taser hidden inside the bear and pressed it to his leg. He instantly dropped to the floor, convulsing and screaming. When he tried reaching for her again, she tased his hand. That's when Mom rushed in, looking completely banged up from jumping out the bathroom window to reach us in time. We ran past Dad and headed out with Mom just as the cops arrived. Mom showed them the video she managed to take after escaping, showing him entering our room and making threats. She rolled up her sleeves proudly to show all the bruising and scars inflicted over the years. "Good job, kids, you're safe now," the officer said. But they were wrong, because when they entered the room house, Dad had escaped, but not before leaving us a note of his own. The officers pushed past us into the house and started searching room by room while we huddled together on the front lawn. Mom kept her arms wrapped around all 4 of us and wouldn't let go even when one officer asked her to come inside. I watched through the window as they checked the bedroom, the bathroom, under beds, inside closets. My hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter how hard I tried to control them. One officer disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard cabinet doors opening and closing. He came back out holding a piece of paper in his gloved hand and called over to a woman in a dark jacket who had just arrived. She walked up to us and showed her badge, introducing herself as Detective Alana. The officer handed her the paper and she read it out loud so we could hear. The note said, "This isn't over. Family always comes back together." Detective Alana pulled out a plastic evidence bag from her jacket and carefully slid the note inside, sealing it shut. She wrote something on the label with a marker. The The officer with the radio pressed the button and reported that the suspect had fled the scene before their arrival. Mom pulled us even closer, and I could feel Letty trembling against my side. Detective Alana knelt down in front of us and said we were safe now and that they would find Dad. She asked if anyone was hurt, and Mom showed her face, turning so the porch light hit the red mark on her cheek. 2 hours later, we sat in the emergency room waiting area while a nurse took Mom back for an examination. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and made everything look washed out and weird. Ivy held Letty on her lap, and Sean sat next to me, bouncing his knee up and down. We could see through the gap in the curtain as the nurse moved around Mom with a camera, taking pictures of her face from different angles. Then she had Mom roll up her sleeves and photograph the bruises on her arms, some yellow and fading, others dark purple and fresh. The doctor came in and checked Mom's eyes with a little flashlight, asking her questions about headaches and dizziness. After about 20 minutes, they came back out, and the doctor handed Mom some ice packs and a stack of papers about domestic violence resources and shelters. Mom thanked them, and we walked out to the car in silence. The drive back to the house took 15 minutes, and nobody said anything except Letty, who hummed quietly to her teddy bear in the back seat. I watched the streetlights pass by and tried not to think about what would happen next. Detective Alana met us at the police station the next morning and took me into a small interview room with a table and 3 chairs. She sat across from me and pulled out a notebook, clicking her pen. She asked me to describe everything that happened during the night, starting from when Dad came home. I told her about the traps we set up, the faucet and the refrigerator and the Lego pieces in the hallway. My voice cracked when I got to the part about Letty using the taser, and I had to stop and take a breath. Detective Alana said we were incredibly brave, but that we should have called 911 first instead of trying to handle it ourselves. I nodded and kept going, explaining how Dad threatened us in Letty's room and how Mom climbed out the bathroom window. Detective Alana wrote down every detail about the traps we set and Dad's reaction to each one. She asked specific questions about what Dad said and did, making me repeat certain parts so she could get the exact words right. The whole interview took almost an hour, and by the end my throat hurt from talking. A woman arrived at the station while we were still there, and Detective Alana introduced her as Queenie Hood from Child Protective Services. Queenie sat down with all of us in a different room and explained that because Dad had threatened us and was still out there somewhere, they needed to open a case to make sure we were safe. Ivy immediately got defensive and asked if they were going to split us up and send us to different foster homes. Queenie held up her hands and said her job was to keep families together when possible, not tear them apart. She pulled out some papers and went over a safety plan with Mom that included staying somewhere Dad didn't know about and checking in with CPS daily. Queenie wrote down Mom's phone number and email and gave Mom her card with a direct line. She explained that we would need to find temporary housing right away and that she could help connect us with resources. Mom asked how long this would take, and Queenie said it depended on a lot of factors, but that we should plan for at least a few weeks. Sean looked at me, and I could tell he was scared about where we would sleep tonight. Back at the station, Detective Alana asked if she could look at Mom's phone to review the video she had mentioned. Mom unlocked it and handed it over, showing the detective where she had saved the file. Detective Alana plugged the phone into her computer, and we watched as she played the video of Dad entering Letty's room and making threats. The footage was shaky because Mom had been recording through the window while hanging onto the frame, but you could clearly see Dad's face and hear his voice. Detective Alana said this was solid evidence for getting a protective order and that it showed clear intent to harm. She asked Mom if there were any other videos or messages, and Mom opened her text messages, scrolling back through months of threatening texts she had never deleted. Detective Alana started taking screenshots of everything, building a timeline of escalating abuse. She cataloged each message with a date and timestamp, organizing them into a folder on her computer. The process took over an hour, and Mom had to look away from the screen several times because reading the old texts was too hard. Detective Alana arranged for a police escort to take us back to the house so we could pack essential clothes and supplies. When we walked in, everything smelled like Dad's cologne mixed with stale beer and cigarette smoke. The smell hit me like a wall and made my stomach turn. Sean went straight to his room and grabbed his school backpack, stuffing in some clean shirts and his phone charger. Ivy ran to the bathroom and filled a grocery bag with toiletries, toothbrushes, and soap. I helped Letty in her room, pulling out her small suitcase and letting her choose which stuffed animals she wanted to bring. She could only fit 3, so she picked her favorites and hugged each one before putting it in the case. The officer who came with us stood in the doorway the whole time, watching the street through the screen door with his hand near his radio. Every car that drove by made him tense up and look closer. We moved as fast as we could, grabbing clothes and shoes and anything else we thought we might need. I threw some of my own stuff into a backpack without really looking at what I was taking. While I was packing my room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Gil, our neighbor who lived 2 doors down. He said his doorbell camera had caught Dad leaving in his truck around 4:15 in the morning, right before the cops arrived. He was sending me the video clip through a file-sharing link. I clicked on it and watched the grainy footage of Dad walking quickly to his truck, looking over his shoulder and driving away. I ran to find Detective Alana and showed her the message and the video. She asked me to forward it to her email address immediately. She watched the video on her phone and said the timestamp was really helpful because it established that Dad knew police were coming and made the choice to run. She thanked Gil through me and said this was the kind of evidence that could really help the case. She asked if Gil had any other footage from earlier in the night, and I texted him back to ask. He replied saying he would check and send anything else he found. Later that afternoon, Queenie met us at a coffee shop across town to explain the temporary protective order process and what would happen if Dad violated it. She spread out some papers on the table and went through all the rules about no contact, no coming within 500 feet of us, and no third-party communication through friends or family. She explained that violations could lead to immediate arrest, but that Dad had to be served with the order first for it to be enforceable. The legal language made my head spin with terms like petitioner and respondent and ex parte. Queenie noticed I was getting confused and tried to explain it in simpler terms. I pulled out my phone and started taking notes anyway, because someone in our family needed to remember all this information. I typed out the main points about the 500 feet rule and the no contact rule and what counted as a violation. Queenie said we should document everything if Dad tried to reach out, even if it seemed small or harmless. Every text, every call, every sighting needed to be recorded with dates and times. That night, we drove across town to a women's shelter where Mom had called ahead to make sure they had space for all of us. The building looked plain from the outside with no signs indicating what it was. A staff member buzzed us in through a security door and led us down a hallway to our room. It had 2 sets of bunk beds pushed against opposite walls and smelled strongly of industrial cleaner. The walls were bare except for a posted list of rules and a schedule for meals and chores. We put our bags down, and Mom claimed one of the bottom bunks while Letty immediately climbed up to the top bunk above her. Ivy and I took the other set with Sean on top and me on the bottom. We all agreed to sleep in our clothes with our shoes on in case we needed to run quickly. I lay there staring at the springs of Sean's mattress above me, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Footsteps, doors closing, voices talking, toilets flushing. I barely closed my eyes all night, and when I did, I kept seeing Dad's face in Letty's doorway. In the morning, Mom's phone rang and she answered to find my school on the line asking about my absence. The attendance office had flagged it as unexcused and wanted to know when I would be back. Mom explained that we had a family emergency and the call got transferred to the school counselor. The counselor said she was sorry to hear we were going through a difficult time and offered to set up sessions if I needed someone to talk about anything. Mom asked me if I wanted to do that, and I said yes because missing too much school would just make everything harder. I agreed to come in tomorrow, even though the thought of sitting in class pretending everything was normal made me want to throw up. How was I supposed to focus on math and English when Dad was out there somewhere planning who knows what? The counselor said she understood and that we could take things one day at a time. After Mom hung up, the phone rang again with similar calls from Sean's school and then Ivy's school. We all agreed to go back tomorrow and try to keep up with our classes, while everything else was falling apart around us. That afternoon, back at the shelter, Mom's phone started buzzing nonstop with calls from numbers we didn't recognize. The first one came in around 2, and Mom stared at the screen before declining it and blocking the number. 5 minutes later, another call came through from a different number, and she blocked that one too. By 3 o'clock, we had blocked 7 different numbers, and Mom's hands were shaking every time the phone vibrated. My own heart jumped each time I heard that buzzing sound, and I found myself watching the phone like it was a bomb about to go off. Queenie stopped by during her afternoon check-in and noticed Mom's phone lighting up again with yet another unknown caller. She asked to see the call log and scrolled through all the blocked numbers, taking screenshots with her own phone for documentation. Queenie explained that Dad was probably using different phones or apps to get around the no-contact order, and that we needed to keep a detailed record of every single attempt. She showed Mom how to take screenshots of each incoming call before blocking it, creating a timestamp and phone number log that could be used as evidence. I started a note on my phone listing each call time and number, organizing them chronologically so we had our own backup record. Sean sat next to me watching the list grow longer, and Letty stayed close to Mom, clutching her teddy bear whenever the phone buzzed. Detective Alana showed up at the shelter around 7 that evening, asking if she could review Mom's phone more thoroughly. Mom handed it over, and the detective sat down at the small table in our room, scrolling through years of text messages and photos. She found screenshots Mom had saved from 2 years ago, showing Dad threatening to take us away if Mom ever left him, messages Mom had kept but never reported to anyone. Detective Alana's expression stayed neutral, but focused as she kept scrolling, finding more threats from different time periods, all carefully preserved in a hidden folder on Mom's phone. The detective pulled out a department tablet and started photographing each screenshot, organizing them by date and severity, building a digital evidence file right there in our room. She asked Mom questions about specific incidents tied to certain messages, and Mom answered quietly, her voice getting smaller with each memory she had to revisit. The detective spent over an hour going through everything, occasionally stopping to write notes or flag particularly threatening messages for the prosecutor. I watched the evidence file grow thicker on that tablet screen, each photo another piece of proof that this had been going on for years. Detective Alana explained that this pattern of long-term abuse would strengthen the case significantly because it showed Dad's behavior wasn't just one bad night, but a sustained campaign of control and intimidation. She thanked Mom for preserving the messages, even when it must have been painful to keep them, and Mom just nodded, because what else could she say? By the time the detective left, it was past 8, and we were all emotionally drained from reliving those old threats. On day 3, Detective Alana brought someone new to meet us at the shelter, a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Ramon Bond from the district attorney's office. Ramon shook Mom's hand and then mine, treating us like adults instead of victims, and sat down to explain his role as the prosecutor who would be handling Dad's case. He was direct and honest in a way that was almost jarring, telling us straight up that Dad might make bail if he got caught, and that the legal process would take months, not weeks. Ramon went through the potential charges they were building, including assault, terroristic threats, child endangerment, and violation of protective orders, but he warned us that outcomes depended heavily on evidence quality and actually locating Dad to arrest him. He asked if we understood that even with all our documentation, there were no guarantees about conviction or sentencing, and we all nodded even though it felt terrible hearing it laid out so plainly. Ramon explained that the system moved slowly and that we needed to be patient while also staying vigilant about our safety. He asked each of us kids if we felt comfortable potentially testifying about what we witnessed, and Ivy said yes immediately while Sean looked uncertain, and Letty shook her head against Mom's shoulder. Ramon said that was okay, and that he would work with what we could handle, never pushing anyone beyond their limits. Detective Alana added that they were coordinating with patrol units to increase surveillance in areas we frequented, which helped a little but didn't erase the fear. The meeting lasted almost an hour, and by the end my head was spinning with legal terms and timelines and possibilities I didn't want to think about. The next morning, Mom and Queenie headed to the courthouse to fill out emergency custody paperwork, while the rest of us waited in the shelter. I got a text from Mom around 10 saying she was drowning in forms and that her hand was cramping from writing out years of incidents in tiny boxes on legal documents. The forms asked for specific addresses, exact dates, and detailed descriptions of events Mom had tried to forget, and she had to keep taking breaks to wipe her eyes between sections. Queenie helped her remember dates by cross-referencing old text messages and medical records, slowly building a timeline of abuse that covered most of our childhoods. I sat with Letty in the courthouse hallway playing games on my phone to distract her from the heavy adult conversations happening in the clerk's office. Ivy helped Mom remember specific incidents, her memory sharper than anyone's about the worst nights, and she provided dates and details that Mom had blocked out. The paperwork took over 3 hours to complete, and when they finally came out, Mom looked exhausted, her eyes red, and her shoulders slumped. Queenie carried a thick folder of filed documents and explained that copies would be submitted to the judge reviewing our case. We drove back to the shelter in silence, everyone too worn out to talk about what came next. That night around 9, my phone buzzed with a text from Gil, our old neighbor who had the doorbell camera. He sent a photo of another note he found tucked under our old front doormat, this one reading just 3 words in Dad's handwriting. The message said, "Family talk soon," and my stomach dropped looking at those words. Gil included a screenshot from his camera showing a figure approaching our old house around 10 the previous night, the timestamp proving someone had been there recently. The person in the video wore a hoodie, but the build and walk matched Dad's, and the camera caught him bending down at the doormat before walking away. I forwarded everything to Detective Alana immediately, my hands shaking as I typed out a message explaining what Gil had found. She responded within minutes saying she would send officers to collect the note and review Gil's footage. Mom saw my face and asked what was wrong, and I showed her the photo, watching her expression shift from tired to terrified. The thought of Dad being that close to our old address, leaving messages like he was playing some sick game, made me feel physically ill. Detective Alana called Mom directly and said this proved Dad was monitoring the property and that we needed to avoid the area completely. None of us slept well that night, jumping at every sound in the hallway and checking the locks on our door multiple times. The next morning, police gave us an escort back to the house one final time to grab remaining belongings we couldn't fit before. We pulled up to find everything looking normal from the outside, but something felt wrong the moment we walked through the door. In the kitchen sink, we found cigarette ash that definitely wasn't there during our last visit, and Mom's favorite coffee mug lay smashed in pieces at the bottom. The bathroom window Mom had climbed through to escape was now closed and locked from the inside, meaning someone had been in the house after we left. Detective Alana, who came with the escort, started photographing everything with her phone, documenting each piece of evidence that Dad had been inside. She pointed out a fresh beer bottle in the trash and Dad's cologne smell lingering in the bedroom, all signs he was treating the place like he still lived there. We grabbed our stuff quickly, nobody wanting to spend more time than necessary in a space that felt contaminated by his presence. I helped Letty pack her remaining stuffed animals while Sean and Ivy cleared out the bathroom cabinets. Detective Alana kept taking photos and making notes, building her case one detail at a time. She told Mom that Dad was clearly monitoring the property and that we should consider it unsafe to return under any circumstances, We loaded everything into Mom's car, and the police escort followed us back to the shelter, and I didn't look back at the house as we drove away. That afternoon, we got word that the judge had signed the temporary protective order and that the court was beginning attempts to serve Dad the papers. Ramon called Mom to explain that Dad had to be physically handed the order for it to be legally enforceable, which meant police had to actually find him first. Until Dad received the papers in person, we had the protective order on file, but he might not even know it existed, which meant it couldn't really protect us yet. Ramon explained that serving papers to someone actively avoiding law enforcement was always challenging, and that it could take days or weeks depending on Dad's movements. The order itself prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of us, contacting us directly or through third parties, and from entering our school or work locations. Mom asked what happened if he violated the order, and Ramon said that would give police grounds for immediate arrest, but only if he had actually been served first. The legal technicalities felt frustrating and backwards, like we were supposed to wait around hoping Dad would cooperate with a system designed to protect us. Ramon promised they were actively searching for Dad using known addresses and vehicle information, but so far he was staying off the grid. We thanked him for the update and tried to focus on the fact that at least the order existed, even if it wasn't enforceable yet. On day 5, I went back to the school for the first time since everything happened and discovered a major problem at the attendance office. The secretary pulled up my records to mark me present, and I noticed our old home address still listed in the system, which meant any mail or emergency calls would go there where Dad might intercept them. I felt panic rising in my chest and immediately asked to use the office phone to call Queenie. She answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation, hearing her frustrated sigh through the phone. Queenie said she would contact the school administration directly to demand an urgent confidential address update, and she was clearly annoyed that basic safety protocols weren't automatically triggered when CPS opened our case. She told me to stay at the school and that she would handle it, but I spent the rest of the day anxious about who else might have access to that outdated information. The school counselor called me in during lunch to explain they were updating all our records immediately and flagging our accounts for extra privacy protections. She apologized for the oversight and assured me that only essential staff would have access to our new shelter address. I texted Mom and my siblings to warn them to check their schools too, and sure enough, both Sean and Ivy found the same problem at their campuses. Queenie spent the afternoon calling each school and making sure all records were corrected and secured. Later that evening, our landlord called Mom's phone with news that made our housing situation even more complicated. He explained that the lease on our old house was entirely in Dad's name because Mom's credit wasn't good enough when they first signed, which meant legally we had no right to return to the property even if we wanted to. Mom's voice stayed calm and professional on the phone, asking questions about breaking the lease and recovering our security deposit, but I could see her hands trembling. After she hung up, she sat down at the shelter's small table and put her head in her hands, and I knew she was thinking about how we had nowhere permanent to go. The shelter was only meant for temporary emergency stays, maybe 2 weeks maximum, and our housing options were severely limited with no rental history in Mom's name alone. Queenie had mentioned applying for emergency housing assistance, but that process could take months, and there was no guarantee of approval. Mom's credit was damaged from years of Dad controlling the finances and running up debt in her name, making it nearly impossible to qualify for a new lease on her own. Ivy asked if we could stay with relatives, and Mom explained that her family lived 3 states away, and we couldn't leave the jurisdiction with an open custody case. We sat there in the shelter room looking at each other, all of us realizing we were more trapped than we thought. The walls felt closer, and the future looked hazier, and I tried not to think about what would happen when our 2 weeks ran out. The next morning, Mom's phone dinged with a bank alert that sent her into immediate crisis mode. Someone had opened a new credit card in her name, and the notification showed recent charges for gas and fast food in a town 30 miles away. Mom spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the bank's fraud department, filing reports and trying to freeze her credit while the representative walked her through identity theft protocols. The card had been used at 3 different gas stations and 2 fast food restaurants over the past 24 hours, which meant Dad was mobile and actively using Mom's identity to fund his movements. Detective Alana added identity theft to the growing list of charges when Mom called to report it, and she said this actually helped establish Dad's location patterns. The bank representative explained that Mom would need to file a police report and submit identity theft affidavits to dispute the charges, adding more paperwork to an already overwhelming pile. Mom's voice stayed steady through all the phone calls, but I could see her getting more exhausted with each new violation, each new way Dad found to hurt us from a distance. The credit card charges totaled almost $300, money we definitely didn't have, and even though the bank said they would investigate, it would take weeks to resolve. I sat next to Mom taking notes on what the bank said and what documents we needed, trying to help organize the chaos. By the time she finished all the calls, it was past noon, and we had missed breakfast at the shelter, but nobody had an appetite anyway. That afternoon, I borrowed Mom's laptop at the shelter and searched for Dad's name on social media, finding his profiles still active. His recent posts made my stomach turn with vague stuff about family loyalty and teaching respect, Nothing that mentioned us directly, but the timing lined up perfectly with everything that happened. One post from this morning said patience is a virtue, and I felt like he was sending us a message somehow. I took screenshots of every single post and sent them all to Detective Alana through the email she gave us. My hands shook while I scrolled through his timeline because it felt like he was watching us, even though I knew that was impossible. I kept checking over my shoulder at the shelter common area, even though the doors were locked and monitored. Detective Alana replied within an hour saying the posts helped build the pattern and to keep documenting anything else I found. I closed the laptop and tried to shake off the creepy feeling that Dad knew exactly what we were doing. Back in our cramped shelter room that evening, Sean and Ivy got into a fight over who got to use the bathroom first for showers. Their voices got louder and louder until they were basically yelling at each other about stupid stuff like shower time and toothpaste. Letty started crying in the corner, clutching her teddy bear because the yelling reminded her of home and how Dad used to scream at us. I tried to step in and mediate, but ended up snapping at both of them to shut up and figure it out like adults. That just made things worse, and we all sat there in angry silence staring at different walls. The room felt even smaller with all that tension packed into it. Mom finally got back from a job interview around 7 and immediately sensed something was wrong. Nobody wanted to talk about it, so we just stayed quiet while Mom changed clothes and made instant ramen on the hot plate. The stress of living in one room with zero privacy was wearing all of us down, and I could see it on everyone's faces. We ate dinner without saying much, and I wondered how long we could keep this up. The next morning, Queenie showed up for a check-in and asked to speak with each of us kids individually about how we felt. She pulled me aside first in the hallway and asked how I was doing with everything. I said I was fine, but she gave me this look like she knew I was lying. Then she asked the real question about whether I'd be okay seeing Dad again eventually in a supervised setting. My chest got tight, and I told her I didn't want to see him at all, but I knew she was preparing us for the possibility. She wrote everything down in her notebook with this sad expression. Next, she talked to Sean, who immediately said he never wanted to see Dad again and meant it. Ivy said basically the same thing. When Queenie got to Letty, my little sister gripped her teddy bear so tight, her knuckles turned white and shook her head no, without saying anything. Queenie wrote it all down and told us the court would consider our wishes, but I could tell from her tone that a judge might order visits anyway. She explained that parents have rights even when they mess up, and that supervised visits were considered safe. None of us felt safe about it, but Queenie said she'd fight for what we wanted. After she left, I felt this heavy weight in my stomach, knowing we might have to face Dad again soon. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Gil, our old neighbor who had the doorbell camera. He sent me an audio file with a note saying his camera caught someone muttering near our old house around 2 in the morning. I plugged in my earbuds and listened to the recording, immediately recognizing Dad's voice even though it was kind of muffled. He was saying something about teaching them a lesson and making her sorry, clearly talking about us and Mom. My hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I forwarded the file to Detective Alana right away, and she called me back within 10 minutes. She said the audio helped establish a timeline of Dad's movements and his state of mind, plus it showed he was still fixated on us. She added it to the evidence file and thanked Gil for being so helpful. I texted Gil back saying thanks, and he replied that he was keeping an eye on things. Knowing someone was watching our old place made me feel slightly better, but also reminded me that Dad was still out there doing creepy stuff. A few days later, Queenie called Mom sounding frustrated and said an anonymous report got filed with CPS claiming Mom was keeping us in unsafe conditions and neglecting us. Queenie explained she had to investigate even though she was pretty sure Dad made the false report to mess with us. Mom's face went pale and then red with anger. Queenie came to the shelter that afternoon and had to inspect our living space, checking that we had beds and food and supervision. She interviewed each of us separately, asking questions about whether Mom was taking care of us properly. It felt so wrong and embarrassing having someone pick apart how we were living when we were doing the best we could. I told Queenie that Mom was doing everything right, and that this was obviously Dad trying to use the system against her. Queenie nodded and said she knew but had to follow protocol. Mom was shaking with anger and fear the whole time, knowing Dad had found another way to hurt us even from wherever he was hiding. The shelter inspection continued with Queenie photographing our beds, the food in our mini fridge, and the schedule Mom kept for our routines. She took pictures of the bathroom we shared and the common areas we had access to. It was humiliating watching someone document our lives like we were suspects in something. Queenie stayed professional and kind about it, explaining each step and why she had to do it. When she finished, she pulled Mom aside privately, and I heard her say she knew this was retaliation and it wouldn't affect the custody case. Mom nodded, but I could see she was still shaken up. Queenie filed her report that same day, clearing Mom of all the false claims. But the damage was done because now Mom was scared about what Dad might try next. I sat with Mom after Queenie left and we didn't say anything, just sat there feeling defeated. Later that week, Mom had to meet with Ramon about the court calendar, and he gave us bad news. Our first real hearing wouldn't happen for 3 more weeks because the court was so backed up with cases. Ramon said delays were normal but frustrating, and we just needed to be patient. He told us to keep documenting everything Dad did in the meantime, because it would all matter eventually. I felt like we were stuck in this weird limbo just waiting for something to happen, but not knowing what. 3 more weeks felt like forever when we were living in a shelter and jumping at every shadow. Ramon promised he was working hard on our case, but the system moved at its own pace. Mom thanked him, and we left his office feeling even more trapped than before. That night, I started keeping a detailed log on my phone of every single incident, call, and sighting with exact dates and times. I made folders for screenshots and organized everything by category like threats, sightings, financial sabotage, and system manipulation. It gave me something to control when everything else felt out of control. I spent hours going back through texts and emails, adding timestamps and notes about what happened. Detective Alana called to check in, and I told her about my log. She said my documentation was actually really helpful and to keep it up. I felt useful for the first time in days. I showed Mom, and she said I was being smart about it. Organizing the evidence made the chaos feel slightly more manageable, even though the situation itself hadn't changed. A few days later, Mom's phone rang from a blocked number, and she almost didn't answer it. But she did, and immediately her face went white. She put it on speaker so we could all hear, and it was Dad's voice doing that soft, fake, apologetic tone he used when he wanted something. He said stuff about how we embarrassed him and turned his own kids against him, mixing in subtle digs with the fake sorry routine. Mom saved the voicemail and sent it straight to Detective Alana. Ramon called back saying it was another violation of the no contact order and to add it to the pile. Each piece of evidence felt so small by itself, but Ramon kept saying they added up to a bigger picture. I listened to the voicemail 3 times trying to catch every threat hidden in his words. His voice made my skin crawl, and I was glad Mom saved it instead of deleting it right away. At the school the next week, I opened my locker and found a generic greeting card sitting on top of my books. There was no signature, just a printed message that said, "Miss you" in basic font. My heart started racing because there was no proof it was from Dad, but the timing was way too weird to be a coincidence. I took the card straight to the office, and they called Detective Alana. She came to the school within an hour and bagged the card as evidence. The school pulled up hallway camera footage but couldn't identify who put it in my locker because the angle was bad. Detective Alana said it fit the pattern of Dad trying to get to us through indirect means. I felt violated knowing someone had been at my locker, and I didn't even know when. The school offered to change my locker combination and move me to a different hallway. I said yes immediately because I didn't want to use that locker anymore. Walking through school the rest of the day, I kept looking around wondering if Dad had been there or if he sent someone else to deliver the card. Every person in the hallway felt like a potential threat, and I couldn't focus in any of my classes. Back at the shelter that evening, Maggie gathered all of us in the common room to run through what she called a safety drill. She had us walk the building perimeter, identifying all the exits, and showed us which doors stayed unlocked during the day. We practiced the route from our room to the nearest exit and timed how long it took. Maggie explained we needed a family code word that meant danger without tipping off Dad if he was listening somehow. Ivy suggested pineapple because it was random, and none of us would say it normally. We all agreed and practiced using it in fake conversations so it would sound natural if we ever needed it. Maggie wrote down emergency numbers on cards for each of us and made sure we all had our phones charged. She went over the protocol for if Dad showed up at the building, which involved us staying in our room while staff handled it and called police. Letty paid close attention to everything and asked questions about what to do if we were separated. Maggie reassured her that the staff trained for these situations and knew how to keep families safe. We practiced the drill twice more until everyone could get to the exit quickly and remember the code word. It felt weird treating our safety like a fire drill, but I understood why it mattered. The next morning, Mom's phone rang while she was getting ready for her shift at the diner. Her face fell as she listened, and I could tell it was her boss. She had to miss work to attend another meeting with Queenie and Ramon about the case. The lost hours meant less money when we barely had enough to cover anything. After she hung up, I offered to get a part-time job after school to help with expenses. Mom immediately shook her head and said my job was focusing on the school and staying safe, not worrying about money. I argued that I was old enough to work and wanted to help, but she stayed firm. She said the financial pressure was her responsibility as the parent, and we kids needed to be kids as much as possible given everything else. I felt frustrated because I could see the stress on her face every time she checked the bank balance on her phone. The money situation was this constant background noise to everything else we dealt with. Mom had to call her boss back and ask if she could pick up extra weekend shifts to make up for the missed hours. I watched her shoulders tense as she made the call, hating that Dad's actions kept costing us in every possible way. That night, I woke up to Sean crying in the bunk above me. He'd had another nightmare about Dad breaking in through the window while we slept. I climbed up and sat with him until he calmed down, and Ivy heard us from her bunk and came over too. Sean admitted he'd been having the same nightmare almost every night since we left the house. He was exhausted and scared to fall asleep. Ivy suggested we create a check-in routine where we all texted each other good night and good morning so Sean would know we were all okay. I agreed immediately and Sean nodded, looking relieved. Ivy pulled out her phone right then and set up a group chat just for the 4 of us. She named it Team Pineapple and added a silly emoji that made Sean actually smile. We all sent our first goodnight messages, and Sean said it already helped knowing we were all connected. I set an alarm to text the group every morning so Sean would wake up to messages from all of us. It was a small thing, but watching Sean's face relax made it feel important. We agreed to check in throughout the day too whenever we felt scared or needed support. A few days later, Ivy showed me a draft post she'd written on her phone about what we'd been through. She wanted to share our story online to warn other families about the signs of abuse and maybe get help or donations. I read through it and felt my stomach drop because she'd included details that could identify us. I told her we needed to ask Mom first, and she got defensive, saying that staying silent only protected abusers. We brought it to Mom that evening and she firmly said no. Ivy argued back that our story could help people and that hiding felt like letting Dad win. Mom explained that our safety had to come first, and posting anything could reveal our location or make things worse. Ivy's voice got louder, saying the system was broken and families needed to speak up. Mom stayed calm but wouldn't budge on her decision. I could see both sides and suggested we table the discussion for now and revisit it once we were more stable and safe. Ivy wasn't happy but agreed to wait. We compromised that maybe later we could share our story in a way that protected our identities and location. Mom said she understood Ivy's frustration, but begged her not to post anything without permission. Ivy deleted the draft, but I could tell she still felt strongly about it. During one of Maggie's check-ins, she noticed that Letty had been carrying her teddy bear everywhere and whispering to it whenever she got scared. Maggie pulled Mom aside and gently suggested getting Letty connected with a child therapist who specialized in kids who'd witnessed domestic violence. Mom agreed immediately without any hesitation. Maggie pulled out a referral card for a therapist named Dr. Avery, who had experience with trauma in young children. She explained the therapist's office was in a safe location and took cases through the shelter's program. Mom called right away to get Letty on the schedule. The receptionist said the waiting list was about 2 weeks out, but they'd call if anything opened up sooner. Mom put Letty's name down and filled out the intake paperwork Maggie provided. Letty overheard part of the conversation and asked if the therapist would take her teddy bear away. Mom knelt down and promised that the therapist was just someone to talk to who could help with the scared feelings. Letty hugged the bear tighter but said, "Okay." Maggie assured us that Dr. Avery was really good with kids and made therapy feel safe and comfortable. 3 weeks after everything started, we went to the courthouse expecting a real hearing where we'd finally get some answers. We sat in the hallway outside the courtroom for over an hour waiting to be called. Ramon showed up with his briefcase and went over what to expect. When we finally got into the courtroom, the judge reviewed our case file while we stood there. My heart pounded as I watched the judge flip through pages. Then the judge announced that despite the documented threats and stalking behavior, Dad had parental rights, and supervised visitation was standard procedure unless there was proof of imminent danger. Ramon immediately objected, citing all the violations and the pattern of escalation. The judge cut him off, saying supervised visits with a trained monitor would ensure our safety. I felt sick listening to this. We weren't allowed to just avoid Dad, even though he'd been terrorizing us for weeks. The judge set up a schedule for visits to start within the week at an approved family visitation center. Walking out of that courtroom, I wanted to throw up. Mom's face was pale and her hands shook as she signed the paperwork the clerk handed her. Ramon apologized and said judges often defaulted to preserving parental rights even in bad situations. The whole system felt like it was working against us instead of protecting us. 2 days before the first scheduled visit, Queenie came to the shelter to brief us on what to expect. She had a whole checklist of rules about what Dad could and couldn't say or do during the supervised time. There would be a monitor in the room the entire visit who was trained to watch for inappropriate behavior. The visits would end immediately if Dad made any threats or broke any of the established rules. Queenie went through scenarios and had us practice what to say if Dad asked inappropriate questions or tried to manipulate us. She explained the monitor would take notes on everything that happened and file a report with the court after each visit. Mom asked what happened if Dad violated the rules, and Queenie said it would go into his record and could affect future visitation decisions. I felt sick thinking about being in the same room with him. My hands were sweating just hearing Queenie describe the visitation center layout. Mom looked like she might throw up and kept asking Queenie to repeat certain rules like she couldn't process the information. Sean and Ivy both looked terrified. Letty held her teddy bear and didn't say anything. Queenie tried to reassure us that the monitor was there specifically to keep us safe, but it didn't help much. At the visitation center, we checked in at the front desk and got led to a small room with a table and chairs. The monitor was a woman named Miss Harris, who introduced herself and explained she'd be sitting in the corner taking notes. Dad arrived 10 minutes later, escorted by a staff member. For the first 20 minutes, he acted like the perfect apologetic father. He asked about school and our classes. He said he'd been going to counseling and working on his anger issues. He complimented Mom on how good she looked. It was creepy how fake it all felt. Missy Harris wrote everything down in her notebook. Then she stepped out briefly to grab some additional paperwork from the front desk. The second she left the room, Dad's whole face changed. He leaned across the table toward us and his voice dropped to a whisper. He said we'd regret this betrayal when he got us back home. He said Mom had poisoned our minds, but family always came back together eventually. My heart started racing and I felt frozen. Then I remembered my phone in my pocket. I carefully pulled it out under the table and started a voice recording without looking at the screen. I angled it toward Dad and kept my face neutral. He kept talking in that low, threatening voice about how we'd embarrassed him and turned everyone against him. Mrs. Harris came back in, and Dad immediately switched back to the concerned father act. The rest of the visit he played perfect, but I had his real voice saved on my phone. 2 days after the visit, a courier delivered legal paperwork to the shelter. Dad had filed an emergency motion for custody, claiming Mom had been alienating us against him and coaching us to lie about abuse. The documents were full of accusations about Mom manipulating us and creating false memories. Ramon called within an hour of us getting the papers. He said this was a classic abuser tactic to flip the narrative and make himself look like the victim. He assured us the judge wouldn't buy it given all our documented evidence. But we still had to respond with our own affidavits and counter-evidence. Ramon needed written statements from each of us describing what actually happened. Mom had to fill out forms about every incident of abuse with dates and details. The legal paperwork felt endless. Every time we turned around, there was another form to fill out, another statement to write, another deadline to meet. Mom looked exhausted from fighting on every single front. She stayed up late that night at the kitchen table writing out her statement with shaking hands. I helped her remember specific dates by checking my phone log. Ivy typed up her statement on her phone. Sean struggled to write his out because reliving it made him cry. We all took breaks to help each other get through it. The following afternoon, Ramon came to the shelter to review the recording I'd made during the visit. He listened to it twice with headphones and had me confirm the date and time it was recorded. He said it was good evidence of Dad violating the visitation rules and making threats. But then he warned us that one threat wouldn't be enough to stop the visits entirely. The court would want to see a pattern of violations during multiple supervised sessions. That meant we'd potentially have to endure more visits while documenting everything Dad did wrong. I felt angry hearing this. The system was basically requiring us to keep getting hurt just to prove we were in danger. Ramon explained that family court moved slowly, and judges were hesitant to completely cut off parental rights without overwhelming evidence. He said we needed to be patient and keep building our case. Mom asked how many more visits we'd have to do, and Ramon said probably at least 3 or 4 before we could file another motion to suspend them. I hated everything about this. We had proof Dad was threatening us, but it apparently wasn't enough proof. Ramon promised he'd use the recording in our response to Dad's custody motion. He said every piece of evidence mattered, even when it felt like nothing was changing. That same evening, I walked past the shelter's front windows and spotted an unfamiliar gray sedan parked across the street with someone sitting in the driver's seat. I immediately found Maggie in her office and told her about the car, and she grabbed her clipboard to write down the make and model while we watched from the window. The car pulled away before we could get the license plate, and Maggie radioed the night security staff to do extra perimeter checks every hour. She assured me they'd log any suspicious vehicles and contact police if anything returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Dad was out there watching us somehow. I started checking every parked car when we left the building and scanning faces in crowds, constantly looking over my shoulder. The next afternoon, Mom called from work sounding shaken and said someone had slashed all 4 of her tires in the employee parking lot. She had to file another police report while waiting for a tow truck, and the officer reviewed the parking lot security footage, but could only see a figure in a dark hoodie approaching her car around noon. The angle didn't capture a clear view of the person's face or any vehicle plates, and the footage was too grainy to identify anything useful. Mom called me after hanging up with the police, and I could hear her voice cracking when she explained the tires would cost $200 to replace. She didn't have that kind of money sitting around, and she had to arrange a ride home from a coworker while figuring out how to pay for new tires. I felt angry and helpless listening to her try not to cry over the phone, knowing Dad was doing this to hurt her and drain what little resources we had left. Gil texted me that evening saying he'd been reviewing his door camera footage from earlier that day and noticed something important. His camera had captured Dad's truck driving slowly past our old street around the same time Mom's tires got slashed across town. The timestamp matched up almost perfectly, and while it wasn't definite proof Dad had driven to Mom's work and slashed her tires himself, it showed he was definitely in the area. I forwarded everything to Detective Alana right away, and she called back within an hour to say this footage helped establish Dad's stalking pattern and his presence near the locations where bad things kept happening to us. She explained that even circumstantial evidence mattered because it built a bigger picture of his behavior and intent. Detective Alana contacted patrol units the next morning to increase surveillance near both the shelter and Mom's workplace, and she met with Mom to warn us about varying our routes and schedules as much as possible. She said we should never leave or arrive at the same times, never take the same path 2 days in a row, and always stay aware of our surroundings. It felt reassuring that she was taking the threat seriously and coordinating extra police presence, but it also meant we were basically living like fugitives in our own town. Sean, Ivy, and I started leaving for school at different times each morning and taking roundabout ways through different neighborhoods to get there. Mom changed her work schedule to vary her arrival and departure times, and we all kept our phones charged and ready to call 911 at any moment. The constant vigilance was exhausting and made everything take twice as long, but we didn't have a choice. 2 days later, the school office called Mom during her shift saying someone claiming to be Uncle Ray had tried to sign Letty out early for a dentist appointment. The office staff had followed protocol perfectly and asked to see ID while checking their approved pickup list, and when this supposed uncle wasn't on the list, they refused to release Letty and asked him to leave. The secretary described a man in his 40s wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses who got angry when denied and left quickly, and the description matched Dad's height and build exactly. There was no Uncle Ray in our family, and we'd never mentioned that name to anyone, which meant Dad had made it up thinking it might work. The school filed an incident report and called the police, and Queenie added it to her growing case file of violations. Queenie contacted the family court the next morning to formally request that the judge suspend all visits immediately pending a review of these new violations. She laid out everything that had happened since the last hearing, including the threatening whisper during visitation, the tire slashing, the stalking pattern near Mom's work, and now the attempted school sign-out using a fake identity. The judge's clerk told her the earliest available hearing date was another 2 weeks out because the court calendar was completely packed. Queenie looked visibly frustrated when she called to update Mom, and she explained that family court moved slowly, even in urgent situations where someone's safety was clearly at risk. We were stuck waiting again while Dad continued to escalate his behavior and find new ways to terrorize us. That night, I pushed Mom to seriously consider moving out of state to stay with her sister in Arizona, arguing that getting far away from Dad was the only way to truly be safe. Mom pulled out her phone and we sat down together to actually run the numbers on what moving would cost. We needed money for a moving truck, gas to drive across multiple states, deposits on a new apartment, and enough savings to cover expenses while Mom looked for a new job. Mom would have to quit her current job with no guarantee of finding work in Arizona right away, and we'd lose her income completely during the transition. Then Mom pointed out something I hadn't considered, which was that leaving the state with an open custody case could actually hurt us legally and give Dad ammunition to claim she was trying to keep us from him. Reality was way more complicated than just packing up and running away, and I felt trapped by logistics and legal restrictions that didn't care about our safety. Maggie found us looking defeated in the common room and asked what was wrong, and when Mom explained our situation, Maggie mentioned an emergency relocation grant through a domestic violence nonprofit she worked with. She helped Mom fill out the application that same evening, and the grant could potentially cover first month's rent and deposit on an apartment in a safer area of town. It wouldn't get us out of state, but it would at least get us out of the shelter and into our own place with better security. Maggie warned that approval usually took 2 to 3 weeks and wasn't guaranteed, so we added it to the growing list of things we were waiting on while trying to stay safe. A few days later, a shelter staff member brought Mom a large envelope that had arrived in the mail addressed to her. Inside was a money order for $500 with a handwritten note from Dad, saying he wanted to help his family and make things right. The note used his fake apologetic tone and talked about how much he missed us and wanted to provide for us, but the whole thing felt like manipulation, designed to make him look good. Mom's hands shook holding the money order, and she wanted to rip both it and the note into pieces, but I reminded her we needed to document everything. We took photos of the money order, the envelope, and the note from every angle before putting them in a plastic bag. Ramon called him back that afternoon after Mom sent him the photos, and he confirmed this was likely another violation of the no-contact order since Dad had sent something directly to Mom with a message attached. He told us to keep the money order as evidence, but absolutely do not cash it, because accepting money from Dad could complicate things legally. Ramon spent the next few days preparing a comprehensive motion for the court that presented every single violation we'd documented since the protective order was issued. He laid out the threatening whisper during the supervised visit, the attempted school sign-out under a fake name, the stalking pattern established by Gil's camera footage showing Dad near Mom's work when her tires got slashed, and the money order with its manipulative note. Ramon argued in his motion that Dad was systematically violating the protective order through escalating behavior, and that allowing continued visitation put all of us at serious risk. He requested that the judge suspend visits immediately and reconsider Dad's bail status given the mounting evidence of stalking and intimidation. The court scheduled a hearing for the following week to review Ramon's motion and all the evidence we'd gathered. The next day at the school, I sat through first period barely hearing anything the teacher said because my brain kept replaying the evidence list and wondering if it would be enough. By third period, I had this tight feeling in my chest that wouldn't go away, and when the bell rang, I found myself walking toward the counselor's office instead of lunch. The counselor looked up from her desk and asked if I needed something, and I opened my mouth to say I was fine, but instead, I just started crying. Not quiet tears, but full-on sobbing where I couldn't catch my breath, and she came around the desk and handed me tissues and let me sit there falling apart. I told her I was tired of being scared all the time, and tired of feeling responsible for keeping everyone safe, and tired of pretending everything was normal when nothing was normal. She didn't try to fix it or tell me it would be okay, she just listened and nodded, and when I finally stopped crying, she gave me a referral card for a therapist who worked with teens from violent homes. I took the card and agreed to go because I couldn't keep carrying everything alone anymore. That same afternoon, Ivy sent screenshots of Dad's threatening messages to 3 friends she trusted for support because she needed someone outside the family to talk to about what we were going through. One of those friends thought they were being helpful by sharing the screenshots in a larger group chat to show people what abuse looked like, and within 2 hours our situation was semi-public at Ivy's entire school. Ivy found out when someone she barely knew approached her in the hallway asking if she was okay, and if the stuff about her dad was real. She came home that evening looking sick and angry, and when Mom asked what was wrong, Ivy admitted what happened. We had a tense conversation in the shelter common room about privacy and safety, where Ivy kept saying she just needed support, and Mom kept saying our location could get exposed. Ivy apologized and immediately deleted everything from her phone, but the damage was done and screenshots were already saved and shared beyond our control. We spent that night worried that somehow Dad would find out where we were through the leak. The next morning, Maggie called Mom into her office and explained that because of the information leak they needed to relocate us to a second safe house in a different part of town with stricter security protocols. We packed up our stuff again, and I watched Letty's face crumple because she had just started feeling settled in this room with these beds, and now we had to leave. The new place was smaller with bunk beds crammed closer together and more rules about check-in times and visitor policies, but Maggie said the location was more secure and fewer people knew about it. We carried our bags inside and started unpacking for the second time in a month, and nobody said much because we were all tired of moving and starting over. Letty clutched her teddy bear and asked if we'd have to move again, and Mom said she hoped not but couldn't promise anything. That night in the new room, I lay awake listening to my siblings breathe and wondering how many more times we'd have to run. 2 days later, Detective Alana called with actual good news for once. She had gotten a subpoena approved for the social media platform Dad had been using to post his vague, threatening messages, and the company provided IP address logs showing exactly where each post came from. The data tied his posts directly to his phone and to an address that turned out to be his mother's house, where he had apparently been staying this whole time. Detective Alana explained that this was solid evidence because it proved Dad was actively harassing us online while violating the protective order, and it established his location during specific time periods. She forwarded everything to Ramon, who called later that afternoon, and said the IP data was exactly what they needed to show ongoing harassment and intent. Ramon sounded more confident than usual and told us we were building an undeniable case piece by piece and that the judge would have to take the pattern seriously now. Ramon scheduled a prep session with me at his office to practice for potentially testifying at the upcoming hearing. I sat across from his desk while he went through questions the judge might ask, and questions Dad's attorney would definitely ask to try to make me look like I was lying or exaggerating. My hands started shaking when Ramon asked me to describe the supervised visit where Dad threatened us, and I had to stop and take a breath before answering. Ramon said it was okay to show emotion on the stand because it made me more believable, but I needed to stick to facts and not get pulled into arguments with the defense attorney. He taught me breathing exercises to use if I got overwhelmed, and we practiced until I could get through the key questions without my voice cracking too much. On the drive back to the safe house, I tried to imagine myself sitting in front of a judge speaking clearly and calmly, but mostly, I just felt scared. The hearing day finally arrived and we got dressed in our best clothes and drove to the courthouse with Ramon. We sat in the waiting area outside the courtroom watching other families go in and out until our case was called, and we walked through the heavy doors into the room with the high ceiling and judge's bench. But when the clerk called our case, Dad's attorney stood up and said his client was ill and unable to attend and requested a continuance. Ramon immediately objected and argued that Dad was likely faking illness to delay proceedings and that we had all taken time off to be here. But the judge looked at some paperwork and granted the continuance anyway. 2 more weeks added to the timeline just like that while we stayed stuck in limbo waiting. We walked out of that courthouse feeling completely defeated, and Mom's jaw stayed clenched the entire drive back to the safe house, and nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. Late that night, I was almost asleep when I heard a quiet tap on the window of our room. All 4 of us froze in our beds, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears while we waited to see if we'd imagined it. Then we heard it again, tap, 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 and Ivy grabbed her phone to call the staff. The exterior security camera caught a figure in dark clothes and a hood moving quickly away from our window toward the parking lot, and within seconds, staff was calling the police. Officers showed up within maybe 5 minutes and searched the whole area with flashlights, but didn't find anyone. They checked the camera footage and took a report while we all sat in the common room wrapped in blankets. Nobody went back to sleep that night, and we took turns watching the window while Maggie arranged for security to do checks every hour until morning. The sun coming up felt like a relief, but I couldn't shake the image of that dark figure standing outside our window. 2 weeks later, we were back at the courthouse for the rescheduled hearing, and this time Dad actually showed up sitting next to his attorney looking calm like he hadn't done anything wrong. Ramon stood up when the judge called on him and presented everything in order, starting with the IP data that tied Dad's threatening social media posts to his phone and his mother's address. He showed the money order with the manipulative note attached that violated the no-contact order, and he presented documentation of the school sign-out attempt under a fake name. Then Ramon laid out the pattern of Mom's tires getting slashed on days when Gil's camera footage showed Dad's truck near our old neighborhood, and he connected it all together, showing how each incident fit into a clear pattern of stalking and intimidation. Dad's attorney tried to downplay each thing individually, saying the social media posts were vague, and the money order was just him trying to help his family, and the school thing was a misunderstanding, but Ramon kept bringing it back to the pattern. The judge listened carefully and took notes and asked a few questions about the timeline, and I could see her expression getting more serious as Ramon talked. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge looked directly at Dad and said she was ordering him arrested for bond violation based on the documented pattern of harassment and intimidation. Dad's face went bright red, and he started yelling about his rights and how this was unfair and how his ex-wife was poisoning his kids against him. But the bailiffs were already moving toward him. They took him by the arms and escorted him out of the courtroom while he kept shouting, and I watched him disappear through the side door, feeling like maybe this was real. The judge ordered bail reconsidered given the escalating violations, and Ramon leaned over and whispered that there was a good chance Dad would be held without bond this time because he had proven he couldn't follow court orders. We sat there while the judge finished her notes, and I felt Mom grab my hand and squeeze it tight. The judge suspended all supervised visitation pending the criminal trial and granted us an extended protective order that would last through the entire court process. She said the evidence showed a clear pattern of ongoing threats and harassment, and that the children's safety had to be the priority over parental visitation rights. Ramon gathered up his files, and we walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, and I felt like I could actually exhale for the first time in weeks. It wasn't over because there was still a trial coming, and Dad could potentially make bail again, and we still had to stay vigilant, but this was something real, something that might actually keep us safe for a while. Mom stopped on the courthouse steps and just stood there breathing, and I saw tears running down her face, but this time they looked different, like maybe some of the weight had lifted just a little bit. 3 days later, I walked into the therapist's office and sat down in a chair that smelled like lavender. She asked how I was feeling, and I started to say fine, but then I just stopped and told her the truth. I said I was angry and scared and so tired I could barely think straight anymore. She nodded and wrote something down, and then she looked at me and said all of those feelings were completely normal and that I didn't have to pick just one. We talked about how I felt responsible for keeping my siblings safe and how that weight sat on my shoulders every single day. She helped me see that I was doing my best in a situation that nobody should have to deal with, and that being a kid in this mess didn't make me weak or failing. I left feeling like maybe I wasn't completely losing it after all. The next week, Maggie called Mom and said the relocation grant came through. Mom started crying right there on the phone, and I heard her say thank you about 6 times. Maggie helped Mom look at apartments online, and we found a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood across town. It wasn't fancy at all, but it had a deadbolt and a chain lock, and the landlord said we could move in right away. We packed up our stuff from the safe house, and some people from a church donated furniture, and we moved everything in on a Saturday. Walking into that apartment and knowing it was actually ours felt different from anywhere we'd stayed in the past 2 months. Mom tested the locks 3 times before she finally sat down on the donated couch. School started getting better after that, because my teachers gave me extensions on late work and extra time for assignments. The counselor talked to all my teachers about what I'd been dealing with, and they were understanding instead of just marking me down for missing stuff. I was still behind in math and English, but I wasn't drowning anymore. I could actually focus during class now that I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder or jumping at every sound in the hallway. Sean told me his teachers did the same thing, and Ivy said her school was being cool about makeup work too. Detective Alana called Mom one afternoon and said the DA's office was reviewing charges for felony stalking on top of the assault and violation charges. She warned us that the legal process would still take months and that we needed to stay alert even with Dad in custody because bail situations could change. Mom thanked her for everything she'd done, and Detective Alana said she was just doing her job, but I could tell she actually cared about what happened to us. Queenie came by the apartment for a check-in and said our case status was shifting from immediate danger to ongoing monitoring with a clear safety plan in place. She said she'd check in monthly instead of weekly from now on, and that Mom was doing everything right to protect us. Queenie gave Mom a folder full of resources for long-term support groups and counseling, and she said she was really impressed by how we'd all held together through everything. Mom hugged her, and Queenie hugged her back. Gil showed up at the apartment the next Saturday with a box of basic security cameras and spent the afternoon installing them at both doors. He showed me how to access the footage on my phone so I could check it any time. He said several neighbors on our old street were keeping their eyes open and would call police immediately if they saw Dad anywhere near there. It felt good knowing we had people looking out for us even from a distance. That night we ate dinner together at our small kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks we didn't flinch at every footstep in the hallway. The conversation was still careful, and we avoided talking about Dad directly, but there was less tension in the air. Sean made some dumb joke about his mashed potatoes looking like a volcano, and Letty actually laughed. It sounded like music. 2 days later, I went back to the old house one final time with a police escort to get the last boxes of our stuff that we couldn't fit before. Walking through those rooms felt surreal, like visiting a museum of our old life. I grabbed my remaining books and some photo albums, and Sean's baseball glove he'd forgotten. The officer stood by the door the whole time watching the street. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out and closed the door behind me for the last time. That evening, Ivy called a family meeting and apologized to all of us for the information leak that forced our relocation from the first safe house. She was crying and saying she was so sorry and that she never meant to put us in danger. We talked about rules for posting anything online and agreed that our safety was way more important than sharing our story right now. Ivy promised to keep everything private until we were truly stable and secure. She kept crying and we all hugged her and I told her we were good. The next afternoon, Letty walked up to Mom holding her teddy bear and asked if she could have a nightlight instead of keeping the taser inside. Mom's eyes filled up with tears and she said yes immediately. They went to the store that afternoon and Letty picked out a nightlight shaped like a moon that glowed soft yellow. It was a tiny step, but it felt really big, like Letty was ready to be a kid again instead of a soldier. The next morning, I grabbed a whiteboard from the dollar store and hung it on the refrigerator with magnets. I wrote out our safety routines in big letters so everyone could see them every day. Check all locks before bed. Vary routes to the school every week. Keep phones charged above 50% always. Use the code word pineapple if anyone feels unsafe. I stepped back and looked at the list, feeling a weird mix of sad and relieved. This was our life now, always watching and planning and being careful. But that was okay because being careful meant being alive and together. We could handle vigilance if it meant staying safe. Mom read the list when she got home from work and nodded slowly, then pulled me into a hug without saying anything. That evening, we all squeezed onto our second-hand couch that Gil helped us move in last week. Sean picked some action movie, and Letty curled up with her new moon nightlight sitting on the side table. About halfway through the movie, Mom's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up and her face went tight for a second as she read the screen. A court notice. Trial date set for 3 months from now. We all looked at each other, the movie still playing in the background. Mom set the phone down and said we'd deal with it when it comes, but tonight we're just going to be together. I nodded and turned back to the movie, feeling Letty lean against my shoulder. The apartment was quiet except for the TV. The doors were locked. The whiteboard hung on the fridge with our rules. For now, that was enough.